Hello and welcome to Unit 1, Lecture 5 for Introduction to Logic. Today we're doing more with translations. And we're talking about translating more complex statements. So suppose you've got something like, you'll enjoy scary movie provided you have a sense of humor and you like horror movies. You'll notice that there are more than two simple statements. There are three. You'll enjoy scary movie, you have a sense of humor, you like horror movies. So we're going to translate this with E, S, and L. We've got provided that and we've got an and. So how do we put this together? We want to say provided that, that's like an if. It's like you have if in the middle of the sentence. So it's going to be if S and L, in parentheses, arrow E. We put the S and the L together in parentheses because they're all part of the if then. It's if you have a sense of humor and you like horror movies, you'll enjoy a scary movie. So that's one of the things you have to think about when you think about translating complex statements is where do you put those parentheses? What do you group together? And there's really not much to use other than common sense, context, and punctuation. You've got to think about what this means. Now, hopefully in this particular example, you can just tell that you like horror movies as part of the if, part of the if then. You're not saying if you have a sense of humor, you'll enjoy scary movies. And by the way, you like horror movies. That would be S, arrow, E, and L. But we don't have that here. Unless Allie and Aaron go to the party, I don't want to go. Here, Allie goes to the party and Aaron goes to the party are all part of the if part you get from the if then with the unless. So unless is if not. If it's not true that A and E, then not W. So not in parentheses A and E. If Allie and Aaron don't go, then I don't want to go, then not W. Let's look at some more examples and think about how punctuation and common sense will help you figure out where to put parentheses. Look at the difference between 1 and 2 here. It's not true that I'm bald and I resent the insult. So we have it's not true and we have an and. The not is applied to the B's. I'm not bald and I do resent the insult. Notice the not is just applied to the B. It's not applied to the whole and statement because you're not saying you don't resent the insult. That's not part of what you're saying isn't true. That's different than 2. 2 says it's not true that I'm bald and I'm lazy. Saying that I'm lazy is part of what they're saying it's not true. So you want the not to be applied to parentheses around the and statement, B and L. They're saying they're not both bald and lazy. The I'm lazy part is part of what they're saying isn't true. So you're going to have parentheses to make the not apply to the whole and statement. So hopefully you can see the difference between 1 and 2. I also put a comma in 1 that I didn't put in 2. You can't really count on people to punctuate all that consistently in everyday life. You just got to hope that people are conscientious about their punctuation, but they're not always so conscientious. You got to think about what it actually means. Now let's look at 3 and 4. If they go to the store at 7 p.m., they'll arrive home at 9 p.m., but I'll be growing hungry by 8 p.m. F, S, then H, and G, but is the and G part of the then part of the if then? Here it isn't, because they're going to the store at 7 p.m. It's not what's going to make you get hungry at 8. You're just going to get hungry at 8. So if S then H, and by the way, G is true. Now it's different from 4. If they go to the store at 7, they'll arrive home at 9, and they will miss the start of the movie. Here, missing the start of the movie is part of what happens if they go to the store at 7. So here we have S, arrow, in parentheses, H and M. You want to put the H and M together, because those two form the then part of the if then. So the difference between 3 and 4 is the last part. Is it part of the then part of the if then? If it isn't, you've got to put the if then in parentheses. If it is, you've got to put the then part of the if then in parentheses to make it all part of the then part of the if then. So hopefully you see the difference between things like 3 and 4. Now let's talk about translating whole arguments. So I'll give you an entire argument to translate. You need to do that if you want to, say, do a truth table for it. But you start just by figuring out what the conclusion is. Remember, the conclusion doesn't have to be the last statement in the paragraph. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. We use the same letter for the same simple statement, even if it occurs in multiple different premises, and different letters for different simple statements, even if they start with the same letter. If they're in different premises, you've got to use different letters for them. So look at this example. If the man in black murdered Inigo Montoya's father, then the man in black has 6 fingers on his right hand. The man in black does not have 6 fingers on his right hand. The man in black did not murder Inigo Montoya's father. Here the conclusion actually is the last statement, this one here. So I'm going to click on that. The word so tells you this is what I'm trying to show. So if we're going to start by translating the conclusion, the man in black did not murder Inigo Montoya's father. So that's just not M. Now move on to translating the premises. So we'll start with this first premise. If the man in black murdered Inigo Montoya's father, that's the same simple statement we had in the conclusion. M. Then the man in black has 6 fingers in his right hand. Then S. FM, then S. Then we're going to translate this second premise here. The man in black does not have 6 fingers on his right hand. That's not S. Then we can do a truth table to see if this is valid or not. So I'm going to go ahead and do a truth table. So we've got 2 different letters here, M and S. When you have 2 different letters, that means you need 4 rows. I'm going to make the first half for the first letter T's. Make this M the same as that M. The next one, you reduce in half how many you do consecutively. We did 2 and 2, so we're going to do 1 and 1. Repeat that pattern to get to the bottom. It should always be you alternate TF, TF as you go down. All right, true arrow true is true. True arrow false is false. False arrow true is true. False arrow false is true. This not will just give us the opposite of what's next to it. This not will also give us the opposite of what's next to it. So now the question is this argument valid? And you want to look for a row. We've got true premises and a false conclusion. In the first row, we've got a false premise. Now the second premise is false. In the second row, the first premise is false. In the third row, the second premise is false again. In the last row, both premises are true, but so is the conclusion. We couldn't find a row with true premises and a false conclusion. That makes this valid. All right. Let's do this next one. We have to translate the entire argument, then do a truth table for it. Marijuana will not be legalized in the next decade unless the medical community will support its legalization. Thus, the medical use for marijuana will be found soon if marijuana will be legalized in the next decade, because the medical community will support its legalization only if medical use is found soon. So the first step is to identify the conclusion. Notice it doesn't have to be at the end. And in this one, it's in the middle. The word thus tells you that what comes after the thus is the conclusion. So a medical use for marijuana will be found soon if marijuana will be legalized in the next decade. That's the conclusion. Okay? So we're going to translate the conclusion first. It's an if-then, but you got to pull the if part out at the beginning. So it's if L, then U, because the L part is the if part. If marijuana will be legalized in the next decade, a medical use for marijuana will be found soon. L arrow U. Next, I'm going to translate the first premise. Marijuana will not be legalized in the next decade unless the medical community will support its legalization. So unless is if not, we have unless in the middle. So if not S, then marijuana will not be legalized, not L. Not S, then not L. And now we're going to translate the last premise. The medical community will support its legalization only if medical use is found soon. So normally when you have if in the middle of an if then, you've got to pull the if part out at the beginning. With only if you don't, because the only if reverses the direction back. So we'll leave this in the same order it's found. So support, arrow use, FS then U. Now we can do a truth table for it. So when you set the truth table, remember the conclusion goes at the end, goes after the slash. So these are the 2 premises of not S then not L, S arrow U, therefore L arrow U. Let's see if this is valid. Here we've got 3 different letters, S, L, and U. You've got 3 different letters, you need 8 rows. For the first letter, which is S, we'll make the first half of the rows trues, the second half falses. We'll treat this S the same as that S. For L, the next letter, we'll do half as many as we did the previous letter, so we'll do 2 and then 2, since we had been doing 4. Half of 2 is 4, so half of 4 is 2. So we'll do 2 T's and 2 F's, 2 T's and 2 F's, all the way down. Then for the last letter, you always alternate TF, 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 TF. We'll treat this U same as that U. Now we'll fill in the table. So for this first premise, we've got to do the negations first. The negations will give us the opposite of the columns next to them. Now we look at the two negation columns to figure out the arrow. False arrow false is true. False arrow false is true. False arrow true is true. False arrow true is true. True arrow false is false. True arrow false is false. True arrow true is true. True arrow true is true. So that's the truth or falsity of the first premise. Now let's do the second premise. True arrow true is true. True arrow false is false. True arrow true is true. True arrow false is false. False arrow true is true. False arrow false is true. False arrow true is true. False arrow false is true. That's the truth or falsity of the second premise. Now for the conclusion, we got to fill that in. True arrow true is true. True arrow false is false. False arrow true is true. False arrow false is true. True arrow true is true. True arrow false is false. False arrow true is true. False arrow false is true. So now we're going to find out if this argument is valid. It's asking is the argument valid. We're looking for a row where all the premises are true but the conclusion is false. In the first row, the premises are true but so is the conclusion. In the second row, the second premise is false. In the third row, both premises are true but so is the conclusion. In the fourth row, second premise is false. In the fifth row, first premise is false. In the sixth row, first premise is false. In the seventh row, the premises are true, but so is the conclusion. And in the last row, the premises are true, but so is the conclusion. So this argument should be valid, because we couldn't find a row where you got true premises and a false conclusion. There was even one row where you had true premises and a false conclusion. That would make the argument invalid. All right, so that's how you translate an entire argument to do a truth table for it. You have some homework we have to practice doing that. On the lecture notes here, there's a whole section here of practice translations. I'm not going to do these. Maybe I'll do a couple of them, but I'm not going to do too many of them. I'm going to leave these for you to practice on your own if you want. Let's just do a couple of them. Human life on Earth will not perish unless either we poison ourselves with pollution or a large asteroid collides with Earth. So we have unless here. Unless turns into if not. The if not's applied to the either or. If it's not true that either we poison ourselves or an asteroid collides with Earth, human life on Earth will not perish, not age. Let's just do one more. China and Russia will reduce their nuclear arsenals only if neither the United States nor Britain increase their tariffs. So here we have an only if. And we have C and R before the only if. The only if we can translate as an arrow. Again, with only if, you don't have to reverse the directions, because even though if is in the middle, with only if, you don't have to reverse the directions. Neither nor is a not applied to an or statement, not either U or B. So these can get pretty complicated, but you can look at the answer if you need to see the answer, or you can work on these by yourself. And these are definitely at the higher end of what you find on an exam. They're not going to be quite this hard. Remember, when you see something like Ross and Rachel will get back together, you've got to think about whether you can break that up into two separate thoughts. So here, Ross and Rachel will get back together doesn't mean Ross will get back together and Rachel will get back together. It's about the relationship between them. So you would just translate that with just one letter. All right? See you in the next one.